Lisa, you have no idea how scary this is. You don't have to worry about anything because your mom's already been murdered. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Welcome to season 9.
Well, here we are for our second episode of season 9. As I said last time, happy to be back in the saddle again, as it were, that sort of thing. And for those of you who are not familiar with that quote from the beginning, it should be obvious from the title of the episode that we're going to be discussing the 2024 movie Lisa Frankenstein. It's a horror comedy. It was directed by Zelda Williams. It was actually her feature length directorial debut, and it was written by Diablo Cody. It stars Catherine Newton, Cole Sprouse, Liza Soberano, and Carla Gugino, who you may remember from our many watch throughs of Mike Flanagan things. As just kind of a brief overview of the plot, it follows a teenage girl named Lisa Swallows. It's set in 1989, and she has been, I guess, struggling with the death of her mother, which I think we will talk about in some detail as we get through this movie. So I'll just leave it at that. But her father has remarried. She has a stepsister, and she's moved and is now starting, I guess, her senior year at a new school in the town where her stepmother and stepsister are from. And she ends up entangled, is a good way of saying it, with a reanimated Victorian era corpse. Um, it's not a retelling of Frankenstein per se, in the sense of it's not like a beat by beat remake of Frankenstein set in 1989, but it definitely follows some parts of Frankenstein, which I'm sure we will discuss. And I'll just go ahead and say my overall impressions on the movie. This was my first time watching it before getting or I guess in preparation for the podcast here. So I had not seen it before. I was aware of it, but had not actually seen it. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a very the humor is very deadpan, and that's like right up my alley. That's the type of humor that I just absolutely adore. It also really embraces both the horror and the comedy sides of the horror comedy, if you will. There is some quite grotesque murders and lots of blood, but it's also a very funny movie, and it's got some interestingly poignant things as well. So I guess that's kind of the intro to this movie. I will kind of turn it over to Mel or Lisa to kind of give us your initial thoughts before we dive into the movie.
I'll jump in here. I remember when this came out, I thought it could be really good because, I do like deadpan humor as well, though I just knew it was a comedy at first. And then Lisa, you watched it and told me that you really enjoyed it and I should check it out. And then another friend of mine was telling me the same thing. And so that friend of mine and I watched it together, and I just laughed the whole time. And I think, as I said before we hit record, it has kind of a Napoleon Dynamite feel for the humor at times, and so I felt like it was kind of like a Napoleon Dynamite with monsters and female empowerment, I think was what I said as soon as the movie was over. But I really enjoyed it. I liked the kind of way they handled the creature. I like the way they handled the 80s-ness, I guess you would say, of the movie. And there were a couple things, I know they're in the doc, so I won't go into them now because we'll talk about them together. But there were a few things that kind of surprised me in the way the characters worked out in the movie. really happy when we had talked about doing this movie because I wanted to watch it again and I just hadn't yet. So this is my second time watching it. But yeah, I really enjoyed the premise and the humor. And like you said, Matt, there is horror in it too, but it never loses that kind of comedy aspect. Though the even though we'll have to talk about how her mom passed away, which is kind of like a horror trope, the way that grief was handled in the movie, I found really poignant both times, but particularly this time when I was taking notes. There's a part way through the movie where Lisa kind of tries to talk to the creature who listens to her about grief for her and how she experiences it. And for this kind of horror comedy romp, I thought there was some really kind of poignant moments there because this is a character who's hurting the entire movie. But I'm sure we'll as she comes back from that. But I'm sure that's something we'll talk about as we go. So Lisa, I'll throw it to you for your kind of general impressions.
Yeah, I am really glad that we're talking about this movie because I adore it. it's it's one of these movies that I just feel like was made precisely for me. Like I was the target audience and it hit a home run. I remember when I first saw it in theaters when it first came out, it wasn't getting a lot of great reviews. Like I remember the few that there were some good reviews for it, but I remember seeing some where people just I don't know. It almost felt like I hate to say it, but it almost felt like they didn't quite get what she was doing. But I think they were expecting a different movie when they went in to watch it. And this movie is, I mean, Mel, you did a really good job of kind of describing how it handles different, like really tough subject matter like grief in a real way, but it's also a little bit ridiculous in the way that it handles some of the other things. And it's very self-aware, as a lot of Diablo Cody's movies are. She did, I think, probably most famously, Juno, but then also Jennifer's Body, which was another one of those movies that I think a lot of people didn't like when it first came out, and it took people several views and like several years to kind of get behind that movie. And now people are finally starting to talk about it in a more positive way. And I think we might see the same thing with Lisa Frankenstein. But yeah, some of the things that I loved about this movie. I love that it is a Frankenstein retelling. And again, I'm using that loosely, as Matt pointed out. This is not a beat by beat um, play on the book, but it does take a lot of the elements of Frankenstein, but it's a nice gender swapped one. So you have kind of the woman being the creator and her creation being a man, which is nice. I liked that it also incorporated not just the Frankenstein story that we know, but also elements from Frankenstein that have like lived on beyond Mary Shelley's book. So, for instance, it has some nice references to like the film version of Bride of Frankenstein, just visually in this movie, which was a lot of fun. I loved that there were actual biographical details of Mary Shelley in this. So you had it like opened on the grave rubbing. Of course, you've got like the grief over losing a mother, which Mary Shelley, dealt with most of her or all of her life, and she talked about. She wrote about it, and it ends kind of with the Percy Bysshe Shelley poem to Mary. So there were some nice like biographical things too that were outside of the Frankenstein text, which was fun. There was just a lot in this movie. I also loved the way it tackled the 80s. On one hand, it was really over the top. I mean, you can tell like Lisa Frankenstein, of course, there's going to be like the poppy colors of like a Lisa Frank um, sticker book or something. So it did kind of feel over the top in that, there's lots of like fun details with like crimping irons and things like that. Um, but also it seemed to like tackle the what are often like problematic coming of age stories that we have in the 80s and like films that I grew up with. Something like 16 Candles or something like that, which doesn't always treat women very nicely in those movies. And this one seems to kind of flip that because for a good part of the movie, Lisa doesn't want to. I mean, she doesn't like create this creature to like fall in love with him. That like happens kind of naturally. Um, and so it's not focused on that, but also it was like very sex positive. I feel like for a movie that was set in the 80s, which was nice. I mean, again, I know it's a modern movie. I know it was made in the 2020s. So, of course, it's going to have more of those messagings. But because it was set in the 80s and it kind of had some of the beats of a coming of age story, movie, teenage kind of romp, I guess, that you would have in the 80s, this one felt a little bit like it was subverting some of those tropes. Um, which was fun because it was also subverting a lot of horror tropes as well. So as I'm describing it, it sounds like a movie that shouldn't work just with everything that's in it. Um, but it does work. And yeah, I just those are my initial thoughts. I love this movie and I'm so glad that we're talking about it tonight.
So, how should we approach this? Do you want to just kind of do a beat by beat, kind of from the beginning through the end of the movie, or do we just want to talk about high points? I'm up for anything, honestly.
I mean, I would say we do like a beat by beat, but you know what? I am going to be all over the place. So I say we hit the high points of it. Or maybe just at least take it like bit by bit as we talk about it. So maybe we just start with the most obvious. And since this is a movie set in the 80s, and how we like felt about that setting and how it was approached. And then we can get into the nitty gritty of like the characters and stuff because I feel like that's going to take a little bit longer.
Well, I'll jump in on that then. I and again, I really did not know much going into this movie. I knew of the movie, but I honestly had forgotten that it was set in the 80s before I started watching it. Obviously, I picked that up really quickly. It's not a hard thing to miss, but I definitely think that it's something that is it's not obnoxious like it is sometimes in movies that are set in the 80s, if that makes sense. Like sometimes things go way overboard with the nostalgia and the pop culture references and that sort of thing. And aside from a couple of things here and there, like it really did not grate on my nerves at all, and I thought it was an interesting choice to set it in the 80s. I definitely as Lisa kind of progresses through the movie and becomes a little bit more confident and starts, I guess, acting out. I don't want to use the phrase acting out. That's not the right phrase for what she was, but she becomes more confident. As that happens, I noticed that she really starts dressing a lot like Winona Ryder, either in Heathers or in Beetlejuice, or a combination of the both, was kind of my note. And I mean, I'm sure some of that was deliberate, but I loved it. I was very much here for that choice. With like, let's just basically make her Winona Ryder. It like looking in terms of style, and yeah. I mean, I don't. I feel like this movie could still have been set at any time, which is a good thing. It wasn't. It wasn't inhibited by being set in the 80s, and that's I think a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Matt. I do feel like it could have maybe been set at any time, but I wondered because I mean, this is just me thinking off the top of my head after watching the movie twice, but the black and white animated opening that we have, which is Victorian, um, and so it's got its own period there, and then we open in with the connection between the two time periods, which is her doing the grave rubbings that our Lisa mentioned earlier. So Lisa Frankenstein is Lisa Swallows is making these grave rubbings of this gravestone. And so I wondered if maybe making it be in the 80s was kind of a fun way of having, and I hate to say this because I was alive in the 80s, of having almost like two period pieces kind of match up with each other in a way. Though I agree, it could have been said at any time. But I just thought it was interesting because, she kind of starts out in this hybrid space between the two when she's making the rubbings of the old cemetery. And that party that she goes to at the very beginning, that she's kind of seen as like connected to spooky witchcraft type stuff because of her interest in those things. It shows us that she doesn't quite fit in. And so I know, Lisa, you put in the doc the satanic panic gossip. I laughed so hard when Taffy was telling her she shouldn't go in the cemetery because so and so dedicated her unborn child to Satan. It's just moments like that you have to laugh out loud. But other 80s touches I thought was interesting. I think of the evil stepmom Janet, her fashion, especially when she's doing her exercises, the fact that she has a tape player. Of course, you have like the shed outside where Taffy keeps all her awards for her cheerleading and pageants and things like that. And so it's got a lot of 80s vibe to it, plus the tanning bed that she won. um, yeah, there's just a lot. The description of the mom when she's missing was it was so many fun details. But like Matt said, I don't think it was so over the top that took you out of it. I feel like it did kind of set the mood in a good way. And I guess since it's 1989, it's kind of like moving into early 90s as well, which you could probably see some beats of that too. And I like your comment, Matt, about the way Lisa was dressing as the movie proceeded, as she started to kind of come more out of her shell, and come into herself a little bit more. I thought that use of wardrobe in that case was really interesting. And also with the monster too. I mean, or I shouldn't call him the monster, he's not. The creature, when he first shows up, he's in like rotted Victorian garb, but he quickly kind of shifts to the new time period, which I thought was interesting. Oh, and I guess another 80s thing is like I was laughing at them talking about the club, the security device, because it just reminded me of all those horrible commercials we had to watch back then about the anti-theft device for your car. That makes an appearance too. So just so many just things. You have to watch it multiple times, I think, to catch all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I I completely agree. And the more I watch it, the more I pick up on like those small details, like the the anti-theft device in the car. Because you could look at a movie like this and feel like, oh, this is way over the top with the 80s. Like, the 80s weren't really like that. But there were even just like the movie opened and she's in the bathroom and she's like trying to crimp her hair or whatever. And I just thought, that bathroom, it was something about like there was like the Shell soap holder and just the colors and the crimping iron and all of it together. And I thought, I've been in that bathroom before. I've seen the commercial for uh that anti-theft device. I've the tanning beds, the avail like everybody having a tanning bed even in their house. I definitely remember that. Or I mean, this was just so small, but because we've got to talk about Carla Gugino, because well, everybody in this movie was excellent, but her as like the evil stepmother, Janet. um but just like, her obsession with like this self-help kind of gurus and the personality test and like the details of, they talk about when she goes missing that she had a square shaped French manicure and wore Elizabeth Arden white diamonds. And that was another part where I was just rolling because I thought, I think they just described my mother in the 80s. I mean, it just, all of it was just, and again, like Matt said, it's not necessarily that this movie needed that, I mean, maybe it did because this was also, in a weird way, it was also kind of a remaking of a lot of those 80s, like, coming of age high school movies because it was the John Hughes movies, but it was also Heathers. I mean, I think Heathers had to have been a huge thought while this movie was being made from the way that she dresses, but also, like, I feel like I'm gonna say this a lot, but I feel like it fixes, maybe subverts is better because Heathers is I love Heathers for its, like, dry sense of humor. This had a lot of that, but I feel like when you look at something like Heathers, the problematic relationship between between what was who was the actor? I'm blanking. It's too late to be recording this podcast with Winona Ryder, Christian Slater. I found it. That relationship in the movie was a very, very problematic one. And I don't know. I feel like it was nice to see, you know, a murderous gothy couple that didn't feel like they were so problematic as as in Heather's. So I don't know. Maybe it did have to be set in the 80s. Just to be able to like reference films like that. I don't know, but yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was wonderful. Let's talk about the characters a little bit because I know we have Lisa and we can talk about her, but I also like I want to talk about Janet. I want to talk about Taffy. I want to talk about, Victorian lover boy. Um, I know you guys have some thoughts. Let's start with some of the side characters first. So maybe I'll throw out Taffy and Janet since they're kind of like they're, I guess, supposed to be the evil stepmother and evil stepsister that kind of come in after the father remarries following Lisa's mother's death. But I don't know, they're really interesting characters if one of you want to jump in there.
Well, I had mentioned this before we started recording. I thought Taffy was really an interesting character because for the most part throughout the movie she's very likable. Like the the evil stepmom trope is all over Janet, and we can talk about that. She's a constant threat to Lisa. Anything that happens in the house, she just automatically jumps to the conclusion that it's caused by Lisa, whether it is or not, and doesn't really care about the motives. But so when I was watching the movie the first time, I thought that Taffy was going to be kind of a stereotypical character, as I mentioned earlier with the pageants and the cheerleading, and she's super popular. And, Lisa starts borrowing her clothes over the course of the movie, which Taffy always said that she could. And Taffy is just like, we are sisters. Like, she is very protective of her at school. She, even at the party, it's still funny, and there's still moments, especially later in the movie, when we find out that Taffy was actually interested in the Lit Mag editor that Lisa was interested in. But even still, there's something. I like the way that Taffy didn't just fall into a stereotypical character like that, that she was supportive of Lisa the whole time, or at least tried to be in her own way. And even, stood up to her mom some when her mom was being particularly cruel or misunderstanding Lisa.
Yeah, I agree. I was pleasantly surprised with Taffy as a character. I felt like it would have been very easy to just pigeonhole her into the ditzy cheerleader stepsister raised by the evil stepmom, who's also relatively evil herself, if for no other reason than because of her upbringing. And it turned out that she actually was a fairly kind and understanding person, and she um, she wasn't as shallow as she seemed, and even said towards the end when she gets caught having the relationship with the literary editor guy whose name I'm forgetting. I mean, she even says like, I wanted to be more than just what I am. Or I am more than just what people think of me as. I'm not just a cheerleader. I'm not just, a beauty queen. And I thought that was nice. That was a really nuanced thing to do when she could have easily been just a stereotype. Much like I know we've kind of talked about Janet in the abstract, but I mean Janet absolutely was the wicked stepmother stereotype, and um, Carla Gugino did an excellent job in it. But yeah, Taffy, I thought she may have been. I mean, I loved the character of Lisa or Lisa Swallows was her actual name. I was about to just call her Lisa Frankenstein. I loved Lisa's character and I loved her character arc. But I mean, Taffy is in the running to be like one of my favorite characters in the movie just for being so having so much more depth than she could have had.
Yeah, and I think with the character of Taffy, and I had never seen that actor in anything else before. Liza Soberano, I think was her name. Um, yeah, I haven't seen her in anything, and she was wonderful. But yeah, I was really surprised by that. And the first time I watched it, I remember thinking that must be what the actor is doing in that role. Like what she's doing with Taffy and kind of lending her this like softness and I don't know, this quality that you just kind of want to be her friend and you want to take care of her because she does seem so sweet. And I think another actor might have played Taffy as more the stereotypical, like, kind of mean cheerleader. But on subsequent watches, I don't know, the more I watch it, I think, okay, I mean, obviously, this movie is about Lisa and this creature that is conjured, maybe by her, maybe by the storm, maybe like both. I don't know, but um, it's about these two kind of embarking on their journey together, which involves murder. So, in order for them to stay likable, they kind of have to fall into the like Dexter trap of, well, they're going to kill people who are obviously awful people, which is what happens. I mean, they kill first and almost by accident Janet. And so I think Janet has to be like the stereotype of the bad stepmother because we can't have otherwise it would be a very different movie. Like if she had any like goodness in her towards Lisa and wasn't about to like ship her off, then it would be different. I mean, we feel bad that Taffy is now having to grieve her mother, but I don't think any of us like really feel bad that like Janet's out of the picture. And so she has to be like a bad character. And it's the same thing with like, and I can't remember the guy at the party who ends up dying that where he gets his hands, basically he gets too handsy and hands on with Lisa at one point, and so he's a bad guy. And then Michael, of course, the literary editor, the infamous one, he's really the one we blame for kind of getting in between these characters, between Taffy and Lisa here. So he's gonna go. So like because Taffy survives, like she has to be, I think, or she doesn't have to be, but she gets to be one of the more like developed characters, one of the better, um, one of the ones we can get to know with more nuance. And I don't know, I just really, on this last watch, I guess I was thinking a lot about the storylines of like the 80s movies that this is kind of like satirizing. And a lot of times women are in those movies kind of pitted against each other, where um they're fighting over the guy, or if she's a cheerleader, she's like vapid and is an airhead, or she's mean and she's gonna like bully people just for fun. and it would have been really easy for Taffy to have been that character for Lisa. So yeah, I think everything that you guys were describing, like seeing them come together and be really genuinely supportive of each other. Like even Lisa tries her best to be supportive towards Taffy after Taffy is like very traumatized following Michael's death. You know, she tries to comfort her as best she can. I mean, they genuinely like are showing up for each other in a really wonderful way. And even as I'm talking about it now, I'm kind of, I don't know, the more and more I talk about it, the more I'm like, no, this movie had to be set in the 80s because this was definitely, I think, subverting some of those tropes. But I think that the character of Taffy was so important to that. Um, and in particular that relationship.
Well, Lisa saves Taffy's life too, because the creature after he kills Michael just kind of shifts over and is gonna um, hurt Taffy. And I noticed that this watch, and Lisa's like, no, don't, and he leaves, and then she takes Taffy in the car, and Taffy's totally traumatized, of course. But that, just like you were saying, Lisa, like she tries to comfort her, even though she and the creature bursted into this violence. And that's what she says, "You are my sister." And she gives her that the necklace or whatever, the last thing she had from her mom. And so you get that kind of like passing on, like they are sisters, like they're part of the same family. So I thought I thought it was interesting what you were saying about how Taffy has to be like, I don't know what the word is. Like she doesn't, redeemed is probably too strong of a word, but even though she does enter into the relationship with Michael, which hurts Lisa's feelings, like Matt was saying earlier, she's talking about how she's a more complicated person, et cetera, et cetera. So he's kind of, I guess, a worse person there. Like the audience would have been devastated if the creature had actually taken out Taffy. So there's something about her that connects her to Lisa in that really interesting way. And then she kind of becomes family to her, which I thought was fascinating. And then, I mean, this is toward the end of the movie, but you have Lisa actually think for a moment about, taking out the creature, but she just can't. And so their relationship shifts at that point. But yeah, Taffy's such a fascinating character. I look for. I definitely want to watch this movie again now and look at all these little details.
Well, I do love these details. I feel like one of the best ones is Janet. Um, so maybe before we talk about kind of the main two or like killer couple here, maybe we should talk about Janet and Carla Gugino. Um, I'll just start by saying I want to see her play the villain more. We got that a little bit when we got to see her in The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix. Um, she did kind of play that like devilish character a little bit, but in this one, she was just, I don't know. I don't even know if I know really if I could pinpoint what it was. She really, when I watched it again this time, I realized how little she's actually in the movie because she is the first death. Um, but she carries so many scenes so well. Yeah, I don't know. What do y'all think about her performance as Janet? It was so perfect.
Oh, I thought she was spot on. I thought she was chewing the scenery very well. um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much more to add than that. But I thought she was great in the role, and I mean, the role is meant to really be like double down on that antagonist role, and she very much is the, oh, something went wrong, or like especially the night after the party where um Lisa had broken the mirror in the bathroom, and Janet's like after she confesses, she's like, "See, I knew she did it," and like she had already prejudged Lisa, and she just happened to be right, and like little things like that, and the way that Carla Gugino like carried herself in the role was was great. And like you said, it was a relatively short role in terms of screen time, but I think Janet's like she is kind of a linchpin to the plot in a lot of ways because, like you said, hers is the first murder, and that does really um, kind of set things off for Lisa and the creature on their killing spree.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys were saying. And I feel like she was truly she was disturbing and she was a true threat. And so that idea of the audience kind of going with it when the creature kind of accidentally kills her and they take body parts from all the people that they murder. But yeah, she there was definitely an antagonism to her, and it was interesting to me watching it this time, like, yes, how little she's physically in the movie, but also how many scenes turn on the fact that she's actually dead, but they think she's in Milwaukee at the conference. And so even though she's not in many scenes, she still does a great job chewing the scenery and seeming like a legitimate threat that needs to be, she's gonna have Lisa, basically committed, but more just to get her away than because it would, you know, this is necessary. And she kind of uses a pseudoscience psychoanalysis to analyze Lisa and her issues, and then is always listening to the self-help on tape about being an intuitive person or whatever, just totally like tone deaf, um all very kind of egotistical or narcissistic. And so there's no way that Lisa could survive in this home in that way. And so she kind of has to go. But yeah, the rest of the movie she kind of weirdly haunts it because obviously Taffy is kind of traumatized by the possible loss of her mom because they don't understand what happened yet. But there's the trying to call her and can't call her, and what does this mean, and she's missing, and that's when everything starts to unravel, and the bodies are found, and that kind of pushes the movie along. So yeah, I mean, in a way, like whether she's physically present or after she's gone, as a character, Janet is integral to the shifts in the movie and the plot.
I feel like before we run out of time, we need to talk about the title character, Lisa and her Frankenstein's monster. Um, there was so much that I liked about the character of Lisa. I liked how I don't even know if like weird is the right way to describe it, but just kind of melodramatic maybe she was or, throughout the movie. I mean, and I say that kind of knowing that like she has reason to be dramatic. Her mother was killed in a horrible way, and now she's living in a house basically with a new family. I mean, her father is there, but she's got this new sister who she's unsure of, and she's got this new stepmother who is very clearly antagonistic towards her. I mean, just the little like microaggression things that she does, like the pizza, ordering the pizza that she can't eat, and just small things like that. Making it very clear that like Janet does not feel like Lisa belongs in that family unit, and she wants her out, and she's gonna find a reason to get her out, right? Um, but I mean, even then, just the fact that like, I mean, and I know it was like the throwback to Mary Shelley or whatever, but that it opens and we see Lisa in the graveyard doing the grave rubbings. She's like found this grave that is like her favorite, and she, even when she's trying to like open up to Taffy in the car when they're on their way to the party, and she's just like, I've been going to the grave and I've been doing these grave rubbings, and there's this one and it's my favorite, and she's like trying to make connection with her, but it's in such like a weird, awkward way that I don't know. I really connected with the character of Lisa then. I thought it was wonderful. I liked that we get sometimes like kind of her dreams and her thoughts, when it kind of has the like that moment where we kind of go into black and white. Um, I don't know. It felt she felt like very theater. She had strong theater kid energy, is what I'm trying to say, and I liked it. I think I've mentioned this before, but I love it when she finally does meet the creature, and he has come to her because he thinks she's in love with him, and she's like, no, when I said I wanted to be with you, I meant I wanted to be in the ground. I wanted to be dead. I did not want to be with you. And again, it's just that like dry humor, and the fact that she's so grossed out by him because of course, he's a corpse that has like come to life. And all the like descriptions of like his odor and stuff. But I don't know. There was so much that I liked about her character. And she was a really fun person to follow throughout this film. So yeah, I don't know. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I like how you described her. She has this love of silent movies, which also plays a role in her imaginings and her dreams. And that moment where she says, I wanted was it I wanted to be buried, not with you. The kind of the different meanings, I guess, of that. Like he misinterpreted, what she meant. And then later at one point she realizes when he plays the piano that he had this thing that he loved, and she says, you had a whole life. And he gestures at her because she's actually alive, and she's like, yeah, I guess I do. And it's really kind of sad, these moments where, and he never says anything, he can't speak, but he does so much with the kind of noises that he makes and the gestures that he makes that I kind of almost forget that he's not speaking. But I think she needs that too, because nobody's really paying attention to her. And so once she has him, people are like, oh, why are you talking so much now? Well, he's actually listening to her, which I think was something that she needed. Um, and then her talking to him about how everybody just wanted her to move on after the death of her mom was so poignant too. And she says, time doesn't heal all wounds because time is the wound. It's all the time that you have to spend without that person. And yeah, there were these moments where the conversations that she would have with him, even though he wasn't like conversing with her, were just so revealing. And sometimes she seemed to see it, and sometimes she didn't. And I like that. In a horror comedy, it was nice to have those little moments um, of emotion.
Yeah, Mel, I want to I want to point out too what you had mentioned about when he's playing the piano and she says you had a whole life, and that stuck out to me. I mean, that scene I think is very poignant, and it stuck out to me each time I've watched it, but especially this last time because I thought I don't know if I've ever really seen a Frankenstein adaptation that considers who the creature was before he died. Where who was the it's always like, oh, he's made up of corpses, but this like initial like who he was. So I did like that. And then it was also because I think I need this too, otherwise it feels too emotional. But like then it's immediately cut by the fact that when he starts crying, his tears smell so bad and she's like grossed out. um this movie doesn't always let the the emotions sink too much without cutting it with some humor, which I appreciate. But I did want to ask you guys in particular about the ending, because that was one of the things that I've seen a lot of people, at least early on, criticize about this movie, that they didn't love the ending and they didn't love basically the fact that, like, I guess it could be seen as Lisa changes herself for this guy that she's fallen in love with. Like she becomes like him basically. She is now a created creature in a way. I don't know. I felt very differently than that about the ending. I kind of looked at it as, and this connects to that piano scene, but when he kind of gestures to her as in like she's got a life too that she's living, but she doesn't feel that way. She hasn't. That's kind of her character arc. So I really felt like in that ending, she not only got what she wanted in the beginning, right? Like she wanted to be with him and buried, and that's essentially what she gets. But also she is living. I'm using air quotes here that y'all can't see because this is a podcast recording, but that it's like she's finally found herself and she's finally found life, and it includes him, but I didn't feel like she found it because of him, if that makes sense. Like that felt like a very distinct difference in that, because that wasn't her journey. Her journey wasn't to like find him and fall in love with him. It just that happened kind of alongside it. So yeah, that I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much nuance into the ending, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts because we do kind of have that moment of them on the everybody thinks she's dead. I mean, she is dead. But we have that moment of them on the bench and like the like park bench, and he's like, I guess, fully whole, and she's going through that journey that he went on to become this like fully formed corpse creature. I don't know what we want, Frankenstein monster. And he's reading her the like Percy Bysshe Shelley poem, which was lovely. So I don't know. I liked the ending. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I felt like she wasn't changing herself to be with him so much as she was coming out of her shell because of him, if that makes more sense. Like he was helping her, well, both him and the murder, strangely, was helping her to finally process the trauma of her mother's death and to kind of move on out of the I don't even know the right word for it, I guess pit that she had been stuck in since then. And so I didn't read the end of the film as like her like I didn't read it as some sort of misogynistic thing where she changed herself to fit into something that like his expectations so much as she processed the trauma and came out of her shell and became more confident in herself as who she was. And along the way, like you said, they also developed like feelings for each other. So I mean, that was how I read it the entire time. So I guess I completely agree with you on that. I don't see Lisa's character as being like failing the Bechdel test in that kind of way.
I agree with you guys. I mean, there's some, when I've seen the ending both times, and I'm kind of like you were saying, Lisa, the creature seems to be whole again. So I'm guessing they got more jolts of electricity or maybe more body parts. I'm not sure. It's not explained, and we don't know how long it's gonna, exactly how things worked with her. Was it lightning? So there is some unexplained stuff, but that's the interesting part of this movie is like there's a lot of stuff like that's not explained. The point is not like the science. The point is Lisa's journey. And I think that's where I agree with you guys. Like I hadn't even that had never popped into my mind that she was changing herself for him. um I felt like they were, even though he fell in love with her first, I guess. um I felt like they were two characters, each going through their own thing, but helping each other. And I found the end, she's the one who comes up with the plan. She fully independently makes this decision as the way to continue on with, her life in the situation it's in. And the police are coming and everything's falling apart, but she has no place there anymore. Like, she's changed. Like Matt was saying, she's kind of, she's working through her grief, and she has someone who understands her now. So yeah, I didn't see it as her changing herself for him. I saw it as her discovering who she was throughout the movie, when she finally had someone who would pay attention to her, um and be with her and respect her for who she was. And yeah, I mean, he's upset at the end and doesn't want her to take this particular step, but she's like, this is the way, and she chooses it herself. And so to me, that made it work. Like, that, I think that was the part that made me not think that it was changing herself for him, but just continuing this journey that she was already on.
Yeah, I really like that way you described it, that it really is her choice. I mean, everything leading up to that is also, she makes the choice even when he doesn't want to. Um, yeah, but she really, I think, maintains control through a lot of it, which is, I think, one of the things that really makes this stand out. Um, yeah, I think I could keep talking about this movie, and we didn't even get to talk about the flying penis, but we'll have to leave it. We'll have to leave it at that, I guess. That and humming the lyrics to "On the Wings of Love," but I think this is a really good spot to end this. I'm really glad we're talking about it. I'm glad this is our first kind of official, I guess it's really our second since we did our recommendations, but it's our first official start to the new season, and I'm glad it was Lisa Frankenstein. All right. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merch available at our website, nofearcast.com. You can rate and review us, which is so helpful. I really encourage you to do that because it is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.